Have you ever wanted to excommunicate a Unitarian? Could you? Could you, if you wanted to, have the mechanisms to do it? This was the question that rested at the center of the life of a minister called Theodore Parker, one we've lifted up in worship here many times for good reason. Parker was a radical minister and preacher in our faith tradition in the early 1800s. He's the person who wrote the words, "A government for the people, by the people, and of the people." Lincoln's speechwriter was a fan. He's a person who said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." He wrote those words originally. Now, Parker was known for being a radical, so much so that he preached with a Bible in one hand and a gun in the other, as he protected freed slaves who were members of his congregation in Boston, when he wrote to the Unitarian President of the United States, Millard Fillmore, and said, "I will not follow the Fugitive Slave Act. You want me? Come and get me." He was known for having radical ideas so much that he funded John Brown in his raid on Harper's Ferry, an attack on the U.S. government and its armory. He was one of the Secret Six. Now, Theodore Parker did all of these things, but none of them are what got him in trouble with the Unitarians. What got him in trouble was his theology. Parker, in 1841, came to ordination. He was preaching an ordination sermon, and this is when we do this kind of stuff, when you're far away from your own church. He said, "I'm going to tell them what I really think." So I played this game with a couple of members of our church on our trip to Boston and in classes, but if you'll do this with me, please, for sake of ease, I'll cast you as the church and I'll be the minister. If you will please, just give me your reactions as we go along that you think Parker's congregation or the one that he was in that day would give. So he stood in the pulpit and he began his sermon, "The Transient and the Permanent in Christianity," by saying, "It looks to me as if there are fleeting, transitory things about Christianity and permanent, necessary things. The permanent looks to me like love of God and love of neighbor. But as I go through the history of our religion, I notice that the only consistent thing seems to be inconsistency. The church fathers are no longer important to us. The things that people believed 200, 300, 400 years ago are not what we believe now. And so I guess the things that we believe are also wrong and won't be believed in 50 or 100 or 150 years. Are you with me? Wait. I have something else to say. It seems to me that if love of God is permanent, the transitory thing is probably the scriptures themselves too, because wait. We've been doing research and we found that they were written by human beings and there's these inconsistencies. Why aren't we talking about that? There's these inconsistencies between the Gospels, and it looks like the writers of the Gospels made mistakes, and the apostles made mistakes, and all this other stuff. Are you with me? Now wait, hold on, one more thing. I've got one more thing to say. He went on to say, in this model, if love of God and love of neighbor is true like geometry is true like your intuition can feel it in your bones, then it seems to me that because Jesus was a human and also made mistakes, that he is also the transient and not the permanent. No. Christianity as we know it would have come about even without Jesus, so he's technically unnecessary. No, go with me. So you can see how this went down in 1841. Not well. The response in public was very different than the response in private. He became so popular a preacher that buildings literally couldn't hold the church. Theodore Parker would preach in the morning at a little church in Roxbury, Massachusetts, and he would go at the end of the day all the way to Boston, which was a long way at the time, to preach in a big church. Now, all he ever wanted to be was a Unitarian minister. That's all he ever wanted to be. He grew up as a poor farm boy. His grandfather led one of the militias in the Revolution. He walked 10 miles from his farm to Harvard to apply to go to seminary there. He couldn't afford the tuition, And so he did the tests via correspondence and was so smart that he beat out all of his class members. They didn't make him do the first 2 years of his degree. All he ever wanted to do was to be a Unitarian minister. As he became so popular, the big church, people like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Julia Ward Howe, William Lloyd Garrison, Louisa May Alcott, they got a bunch of people together called the Friends of Theodore Parker and started a new church for him in Boston called the 28th Congregationalist Society. 3% of Boston's population attended on Sunday mornings. 2,000 people. He had one of the first mega churches in the United States. It looked like things were going well, except in private. Because after he gave that sermon, the transient and the permanent in Christianity, the Unitarian ministers in town were upset. They didn't know what to do with him. They fought for 2 years about what to do about the Parker problem in his presence. They would invite him to clergy gatherings and church parlors and living rooms and dining rooms over meals and say, "No offense, but..." In some occasions, in his journal, he wrote that he got up in tears and ran out of the room, all he ever wanted to do and be being questioned in his face. They wanted to excommunicate him, but they couldn't. There's no mechanism by which to excommunicate a Unitarian, and so after 2 years, they decided their formal response would be to be mean to him. They had nothing else to do, and in the stilted 19th century language of the time, they declared, "We shall not have ministerial intercourse with Mr. Parker." What it meant was, you can't preach at my church, you'll never get invited to anything anymore, and I will turn my back on you in public. You're gone to us. Heretic. You're out. Theodore Parker died in 1860, before the Civil War. He never saw abolition, his dream, come to fruition, and he would be shocked. I hope there's an afterlife so he knows that he was right. The Orthodox of one era becomes the heretic of the next. The heretic becomes the Orthodox, and this man, cast out of his faith community, is now required reading in Unitarian seminaries. When we talked about this on our last adult trip in Boston, we went to the Divinity School Library at Harvard and we read his original journals in his handwriting where he wrote, "Now I feel comfortable saying what's on my mind. I'm going to take the next step." When we read those, a member of our congregation on the trip turned to me and asked, "So what would you have to say now to get that kind of reaction? What are the boundaries that you can't cross? What are the things that would define you as Orthodox or a heretic in a Unitarian church? What are the deal breakers?" I loved her question because it didn't ask, "Are there those things?" It just assumed that they exist and asked us what they were. And then she said, "I hope that that's what you'll preach to us." This is a good church we have. Because I'm a smart man, instead of listing those things explicitly and laying my heart out on the floor, I would encourage you for just a minute, in silence in your mind, think of what the deal breakers would be for you. I don't mean your preferences, like I like these hymns or not, this style of music or not, I like prayer or not, or the Bible or not. I don't mean that kind of stuff. The deal breakers that you think if a minister preached from this pulpit would be their last sermon here. Think about those things at a General Assembly, our conference of Unitarians, or in sermons or books, or maybe even just as a member, what you think would put you on the outs if you actually said it out loud. In my experience, the tables have turned just a little bit. Back in the day, Theodore Parker could commit a little light treason and not get in trouble. It was his theology that was the problem. That's what was debated, not his social stances. I think in our current circumstance now, our implicit or unspoken boundaries, the orthodoxy that we hold is not necessarily theological anymore, but probably more explicitly political and social. The kind of thing that you find out only after you've crossed the boundary. My guess is that a minister in this pulpit could preach one week about their understanding of prayer, and say things that you didn't agree with, but it would be okay. The minister the next week could stand up and say something different, and it would be fine. But if that minister got up at our annual conference and said, "My Unitarian beliefs have led me to a pro-life position. I'm starting a caucus. Will you join me?" They would have found out where the unspoken boundary lies. My guess is that a minister, a newly minted minister, going before the fellowshipping panel that determines whether we get the stamp of approval, who said they disagree with the denomination's stance on race or immigration, on LGBT issues, would find out where the boundaries are. My guess is that there are plenty of people who have gone to dinner in their supper club of Unitarians and mentioned who they voted for, and the room went silent. Every group of human beings has these things. Just because we don't have a creed doesn't mean we don't have dogmatic thinking. We're people, and people do that. The challenge is when these things go unspoken or implicit, because you only find out the furniture's there after you've tripped over it in front of everybody. It's like dating for the first time and going home with somebody to their house for Thanksgiving, and they don't have a sign on the wall that said, "That's Dad's chair," but you found out it was because you sat in it. Or everyone's making a joke about your mother-in-law and you join in, and they look at you to say, "We can do that, but you cannot." Ralph Waldo Emerson, in his essay Self-Reliance, said that the Unitarian ministers of his day were hired attorneys, there to tell people that their vices weren't so bad and their virtues were bigger than they ever thought. That they would never stray outside of the boundary, and he's still kind of right. We know where the boundaries are. And that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. One of the amazing things about our tradition is that while we have a party line, and we do, you don't have to always agree with it to be here. That's one of the wonderful things I love about this place, is that we can say this is important to us, or the majority of us hold this position, but if you disagree, still come, be a part of who we are. Boundaries are good. A center is good. A statement that comes from deep and thoughtful reflection is a good and valuable thing. Knowing who you are is wonderful. Have you ever been to one of those restaurants where they have every cuisine on the planet? We can get lo mein and egg rolls and tacos and Thai food. Is it good? Liberal religion at its worst could be the world buffet of faith, saying everything without saying anything at all. Boundaries and clarity are a good and vital thing. Our dear friends in the Methodist Church this week are struggling over an intense fight that they've been having conference after conference, where they get together and debate whether or not they're allowed to have gay ministers and do fully inclusive marriages. And that is the fight I am so grateful we don't have to have. It's a fight that I'm glad we have settled and said, this is where we will stand on this issue. Boundaries can be so good. But I think sometimes when we're trying to explain this place, it's so much easier to explain it not by our approach to grace, but by our approach on a political issue. Not by how we understand the movement of the Spirit, but how we understand something you can vote yes or no on. Something that you can put your name next to or not. And I get it. It's concrete. It makes sense. It's clear. But it just doesn't swim in that subtle water of people whose main intent is to live in justice and peace. The relationship expert Esther Perel writes in one of her books that the very things that bring couples together, the very things that have a shared identity, that bring you close and make you feel bonded, are the very things that reduce the mystery between you. The assumption that I already know what my spouse thinks about all issues means I'm not very curious to find out more. The daily routines that form the identity of our household are the ones that rob our sense of separateness and mystery. In her framework and relationship, it robs us of desire when we believe that we already know everything about the other person. Why would I desire something I fully understand and know? That can happen in churches too. For us theologically, we've determined that God, whatever God is or isn't, has to be mysterious. Because it is by nature bigger than any of us little humans, and to fit the fullness of the center of all reality itself in the few inches of skull that I've got will never happen. The Universalist Church had a symbol that was an off-centered cross. What that meant is, we're Christians, but you don't have to be. We're not the center of the universe. We pray every week, God of many names, mystery beyond all our naming, and I think that when we stand in the position of being right, it's really hard to encounter a mystery. Mystery and certainty don't always easily match. The question is whether we are willing to be mysteries to one another here. Because there's a way of doing church that says, I come here because they're already right about all the issues I care about. And that's good, because I want to be around people who share my values, but it can happen that you come in here and suddenly we lose curiosity for each other. If I'm here to be with the people who are already by definition right, I really don't need you specifically. I just need anyone who believes the right things. And so it would be disingenuous to say, come, whoever you are. If what I really mean is, come, whoever you are, as long as you agree with me, or at least are on the path to agreeing with me. That view can be a condescending one that says, I'm so glad you're here. Once you hear more from me, then we'll agree. Are we allowed to be mysteries to one another, to desire one another's company, to say that there's a holy space between us in which a God of many names will rest? In my experience, all these wonderful dynamics in life, grace, being forgiven, learning something new, being held and loved after my mistakes, only happened by definition because I wasn't right. I've never been forgiven for how right I was. I've never learned when I knew everything. I've never known grace when I didn't need it. They all came because I needed it. The woman in the poem that Jesse read this morning in Mass Ave in Boston knows the script. And if you've ever lived or driven in Boston, that's the script. You get out of the car and you scream at each other until she figured out that nobody was hit. And that white, hot rage of being right, that orthodoxy had to finally go away. These two women who were screaming at each other in the middle of the street only found embrace when they determined that they weren't right. Grace, forgiveness, and learning and compassion, all these things live by definition outside of orthodoxy. As Gordon Atkinson wrote in the reading that we read this morning from Real Life Preacher, it all depends on what question you ask. These things can feel like irreconcilable tensions. Freedom and making clear statements of value. Tolerance and making a difference in the world and having a clear boundary. They can feel irreconcilable until we start asking a different question. Then that tension becomes creative. If the question you ask when you come in here isn't, do these people agree with me, but rather, does this place make me more loving and just? Is this church breaking my heart open and letting a bigger one grow back in its place? Have I gotten a sense that I am small and beautiful all at the same time in this place? Those questions turn polarities into creative tension. Theodore Parker claimed that there are transient things and permanent things in his faith. For me, the permanent in our tradition is not a position, but a posture. It's not an opinion we hold, but a posture of doing religion that's grounded in profound humility and active love. That whatever we do, whatever we decide, whatever position we take or don't, if we're grounded in profound humility and active love, there's mystery left for us. Because when we rest in that position of profound humility and active love, then there is a place for you at the table. Of course there's a party line. We're people who have gathered together to share values. Of course there's a party line, but if you agree with 95% of it, or 90 or 70, and wonder if there's a place for you here, there is. As long as you are grounded in profound humility, active love, you are not yet done growing, and you want to make the world a more loving and beautiful and just place. Welcome home. In that position, we truly need one another, not abstract versions of each other, but you just as you are, because I am not finished yet. In that position of profound humility and active love outside any dogma or orthodoxy, there is life yet to live. And your story's not over, and God is not done with you yet, and God is not done with this church yet, and we will find that there is mystery and life and love and grace and forgiveness and redemption and hope waiting for us around every corner. May it be so. Amen.